The heavy knock on the door wasn't just unexpected. It felt like a challenge. Eric paused, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel, his mind racing with confusion. It was a quiet evening, and visitors weren't common in his modest suburban neighborhood. He opened the door hesitantly, only to be greeted by a man whose presence exuded arrogance and hostility. "Hey, loser," the man spat out, his voice dripping with contempt. Marcus leaned casually against the doorframe, dressed in an expensive blazer that screamed wealth and power. "I'm here to pick up Lila. We've got plans tonight." Eric froze, his mind struggling to process the audacity of the situation. His wife, Lila, appeared behind Marcus, her face cold and impassive, as if this moment was something she had rehearsed. She avoided his gaze, the weight of her betrayal now standing in his living room. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Marcus smirked, stepping inside without being invited. "You should be thanking me, really. Lila deserves someone who can actually take care of her needs. Someone who's not, well, you." Eric's shock turned into a simmering rage. He clenched his fists at his sides, his nails digging into his palms, trying to suppress the torrent of emotions threatening to boil over. But Marcus wasn't done. "You're pathetic," Marcus continued, laughing as he brushed past Eric, heading toward the kitchen as if he owned the place. "You can't give her what I can. Tonight's just the beginning of a better life for her." Lila finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Eric, I didn't mean for you to find out like this, but it's better this way." Eric's chest felt like it was caving in. Her words confirmed what he feared most. The woman he had loved and built a life with was now choosing another man. This man, who invaded his home and insulted him without remorse. In that moment, something inside Eric shifted. The betrayal was searing, but it wasn't going to break him. Instead, it ignited a dark resolve. As Marcus smirked and turned toward Lila, Eric silently vowed that this humiliation would not go unanswered. Eric had always been a man of routine, a creature of quiet habits and humble ambitions. A self-employed carpenter, he took pride in the work of his hands, finding satisfaction in crafting furniture and fixing homes for families who couldn't afford much. He was kind, dependable, and devoted to his wife, Lila. Lila, on the other hand, had always craved something more, a life less ordinary. When they married 6 years ago, she had been charmed by Eric's steady nature and his unwavering love. But over time, the shine of their simple life dulled for her. She yearned for excitement, for the thrill of luxury, and for a partner who could sweep her off her feet with grand gestures. Eric's quiet dedication wasn't enough for her anymore. Enter Marcus. He was everything Eric was not. Confident, ostentatious, and unapologetically ambitious. A successful businessman in his mid-30s, Marcus had a magnetic charm that drew people in. He thrived on control, whether in his boardroom or his personal life, and he had a knack for identifying weaknesses in others, weaknesses he could exploit to his advantage. Lila met Marcus at a charity gala she attended with a friend. He had approached her with a drink and a dazzling smile, and within minutes, she was captivated. He listened to her grievances about her mundane life, and for the first time in years, she felt seen. Marcus showered her with compliments, made her laugh, and whispered promises of a world she could only dream of. It didn't take long for her to start meeting him in secret. For Marcus, Lila wasn't a soulmate. She was a conquest. Winning her over was just another notch on his belt, another validation of his superiority over men like Eric. He relished the challenge of pulling her away from her loyal, hard-working husband. To him, Eric represented everything he despised: mediocrity and weakness. What Lila didn't see, or chose to ignore, were the cracks in Marcus's polished image. Beneath his charm lay a ruthless opportunist who saw people as pawns. Marcus was the kind of man who thrived on power and control, and Lila had become his latest trophy. Eric had started to sense the distance in his marriage long before that night. The warmth in Lila's eyes had faded, replaced by a restlessness he couldn't fix. He had tried to bridge the gap, planning small surprises and romantic dinners, but nothing seemed to reignite the spark. What he didn't know was that Marcus had already swooped in, filling her head with dreams of a life Eric couldn't provide. The betrayal cut deep because Eric had always believed in the sanctity of their bond. He had worked tirelessly to give Lila a stable life, sacrificing his own desires to ensure her happiness. Now, standing in his own home as Marcus flaunted his control, Eric realized that the love he had so carefully nurtured had been trampled underfoot. But this wasn't the end of Eric's story. Not by a long shot. It had started weeks earlier, with a sudden tension Eric couldn't quite place. Lila had grown more distant, her phone glued to her hand, her laughter reserved for someone on the other side of a screen. The little moments they used to share, smiling over breakfast, watching movies on the couch, had evaporated like smoke. Eric knew something was wrong, but he didn't want to admit it, even to himself. Then came the night that shattered everything. Eric had just finished sanding a cabinet in his workshop. He entered the house, wiping sawdust from his arms, and found Lila sitting at the kitchen table. Her posture was stiff, her face pale. She glanced up as he walked in, and for a fleeting moment, guilt flickered in her eyes. "Eric," she began hesitantly, her voice low, "we need to talk." A chill ran down his spine. He set the towel down and leaned against the counter, bracing himself. "What's going on?" She hesitated, avoiding his gaze. I've been seeing someone else." The words hung in the air, heavy and unforgiving. "It's Marcus." For a moment, Eric didn't respond. He couldn't. The world seemed to tilt, his breath caught in his throat. He had suspected something was wrong, but hearing her say it, so bluntly, so devoid of remorse, was like a punch to the gut. "You've been—" "What?" he finally managed, his voice trembling. Lila's expression hardened, as though bracing for a fight. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said quickly. "But it did. Marcus, he listens to me, Eric. He makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. You're a good man, but you're just so predictable. You're comfortable and I—" She stopped herself, as if realizing the cruelty of her words too late. "Predictable?" Eric's voice rose, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I've worked my ass off to give us a stable life, Lila. And this is how you repay me? By running off with some stranger." "He's not a stranger," she snapped. "He's successful, ambitious, everything you're not." The words sliced through him, deeper than he thought possible. He clenched his fists, his knuckles whitening as he fought to keep his composure. "And that makes it okay to destroy everything we've built? To throw it all away?" Lila didn't answer. She just looked down, as if she couldn't bear the weight of his gaze. A week later, Marcus showed up at their home uninvited. Eric was in the living room when the knock came, louder and more insistent than necessary. He opened the door to find Marcus standing there, dressed in his usual expensive attire, his smug grin radiating confidence. Lila stood behind him, her arms crossed, her expression detached. "Evening," Marcus said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Thought I'd drop by and pick up Lila. We've got plans tonight." Eric stood frozen in the doorway, his blood boiling. "You've got some nerve showing up here." Marcus chuckled. "Relax, pal. I'm doing you a favor. Lila deserves a night out, and let's face it, you're not exactly cutting it in the excitement department." "Get out," Eric said through gritted teeth. But Marcus ignored him, strolling into the house as if it were his own. "Look, I get it," he continued, picking up a framed photo of Eric and Lila from the mantel. "You had your time, but Lila's moved on. Maybe it's time you do the same." Lila remained silent, her indifference like a slap in the face. She didn't defend Eric or scold Marcus for his arrogance. She simply watched, as if this was just another uncomfortable moment to endure. Eric's hands shook as he fought to keep his anger in check. "You think you can walk in here, insult me in my own home, and just take my wife?" Marcus shrugged, a smug smile playing on his lips. "What are you going to do about it?" That was the moment something inside Eric snapped. The devastation that had weighed him down since Lila's confession was replaced by something colder, sharper. Marcus's arrogance, Lila's apathy. It all fueled a dark resolve. "I'll show you," Eric said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Marcus laughed, slapping Eric on the shoulder as if they were old friends. Good luck with that, buddy. As Marcus turned his attention back to Lila, Eric watched them with a new clarity. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Marcus thought he had won, but he had underestimated the man he had just humiliated. Lila thought Eric would fade quietly into the background. They were both wrong. Eric wasn't broken. He was planning, and they were going to regret ever thinking they could walk all over him. The anger that coursed through Eric wasn't the explosive, fleeting kind. It was quiet, deliberate, and calculated, like the slow burn of embers ready to ignite a wildfire. He knew he couldn't confront Marcus head-on. Men like Marcus thrived on direct challenges. They used their wealth and influence to crush opposition. No, Eric would have to play the long game. If Marcus was going to fall, it would be from a height so great he'd never recover. Eric started by learning everything he could about his enemy. He spent hours online, poring over Marcus's social media profiles and professional networks. Marcus, as expected, flaunted his wealth and success like a badge of honor. Lavish vacations, high-profile business meetings, photos with influential figures. It was all there, a digital breadcrumb trail of arrogance. But buried beneath the surface, Eric sensed there was more to Marcus's empire than met the eye. One evening, as Eric sat at his kitchen table surrounded by notes and printouts, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Logan, an old college friend he hadn't spoken to in years. Logan was a forensic accountant who specialized in uncovering financial fraud. They had parted ways after college but had stayed in touch sporadically. "Hey Eric," Logan's message read. "Saw your post about needing some business advice. What's up?" Eric hadn't expected a response so quickly. He hesitated, unsure if he should involve someone else in his personal vendetta. But then he realized he couldn't do this alone. Marcus was too powerful, too connected. If Eric was going to bring him down, he needed expertise. Eric typed back, "It's about someone I know, a businessman. I think he's involved in shady dealings, and I want to expose him. Can you help?" Logan called within minutes. "All right," he said after Eric explained the situation. "I can't promise anything, but if you give me his name and any details you've got, I'll see what I can dig up." Eric didn't hesitate. Marcus Hale, CEO of Hale Enterprises. Logan let out a low whistle. "Big fish. This could take some time, but I'll do my best." While Logan got to work, Eric focused on Marcus's personal life. He started discreetly following Marcus's patterns, noting the restaurants he frequented, the gyms he visited, and the people he interacted with. It wasn't long before Eric discovered Marcus's Achilles heel. His need for power and control often left him careless. He treated people like pawns, and some of those pawns were more than willing to talk when approached by someone as unassuming as Eric. A bartender at Marcus's favorite lounge mentioned that Marcus often bragged about creative accounting at his company. A personal trainer revealed that Marcus had a habit of paying for luxury items in cash, avoiding digital trails. These breadcrumbs confirmed Eric's suspicion. Marcus's business empire wasn't as pristine as he made it seem. A week later, Logan called with an update. "Eric, you were right. This guy's got skeletons in his closet. Big ones." Logan explained that he had uncovered irregularities in Marcus's financial records. Hale Enterprises appeared to be a legitimate company on the surface, but deeper investigation revealed a series of shell companies tied to suspicious transactions. Logan also found evidence of tax evasion, fraudulent invoices, and unreported income streams. "This guy's using his business as a cover for all kinds of shady activity," Logan said. "If this gets out, it'll ruin him." Eric felt a surge of satisfaction, but he remained cautious. "How do we make sure this sticks?" "You'll need to hand this over to the right people. Regulators, media, maybe even competitors who'd love to see him fall," Logan suggested. "But you've got to time it right. Hit him when he's least prepared." Eric's determination solidified. This was no longer just about revenge, it was about justice. Marcus had built his empire on lies, manipulating and exploiting others for his gain. Bringing him down wasn't just personal. It was necessary. As Eric worked on refining his plan, he felt himself changing. The heartbreak that had once consumed him was replaced by a cold, focused determination. He no longer cared about Lila's betrayal or even her reasons for choosing Marcus. Her indifference had severed whatever connection they once shared. Now she was just collateral damage in Marcus's downfall. To Eric, revenge wasn't just about making Marcus suffer. It was about taking back control of his life. For too long, he had let others dictate the narrative. First, Lila's dissatisfaction had eaten away at his confidence. Then Marcus's intrusion had humiliated him in his own home. No more. Eric began to envision the moment Marcus's world would collapse. The shock in his eyes, the fear in his voice as the carefully constructed facade came crashing down. And Lila? She would finally see the man she had chosen for who he truly was. Eric mapped out his next steps carefully. First, he would send anonymous tips to financial regulators, providing them with Logan's evidence. He would also leak the information to a prominent journalist known for exposing corporate corruption. Then, he would feed key details to Marcus's business rivals, ensuring they capitalized on his weaknesses. Finally, Eric planned to orchestrate a public humiliation, a moment Marcus couldn't escape from. It wouldn't be enough to dismantle his business privately. Marcus needed to feel the sting of disgrace in the same way Eric had when Marcus mocked him in his own home. With every piece of the plan falling into place, Eric felt a grim satisfaction. This wasn't vengeance born of rage. It was a meticulous, calculated effort to dismantle the life of the man who thought he could walk into Eric's world and take whatever he wanted. Marcus Hale had underestimated Eric. But soon, he would learn the price of his arrogance. Eric's plan was finally in motion, and each step unfolded with the precision of a chess game. The first move was to hit Marcus where it hurt the most, his business. Eric anonymously forwarded the evidence of Marcus's fraudulent activities to key financial regulators. The files, painstakingly compiled by Logan, detailed the full extent of Marcus's illegal dealings, including tax evasion and money laundering. Each document was damning, leaving no room for doubt. Within days, the fallout began. Eric's first sign of success came when a news report surfaced about an investigation into Hale Enterprises. The headline read, "CEO under scrutiny for alleged financial misconduct." The article, published by a well-known investigative journalist, described the allegations in detail, though the source of the leaked documents remained anonymous. Eric could imagine the chaos this would cause in Marcus's world. Clients would begin asking questions, investors would panic, and competitors would pounce on the opportunity to exploit his weakness. But Eric wasn't done. The news was only the beginning. Through carefully timed emails, Eric ensured Marcus's biggest clients received the leaked documents directly. He included a simple message: "Do you really want to be associated with someone like this?" The reaction was immediate. Several high-profile clients pulled their contracts, issuing public statements condemning Hale Enterprises. Shareholders began demanding answers, and Marcus's board of directors called an emergency meeting. The empire Marcus had built on lies and arrogance was beginning to crumble, one piece at a time. Meanwhile, regulators froze several of Marcus's accounts as part of their investigation, leaving him scrambling to keep his business afloat. Eric knew that Marcus was the kind of man who thrived on control, and watching that control slip through his fingers must have been infuriating. While Marcus dealt with the professional fallout, Eric turned his attention to Lila. He knew she had built her new life on Marcus's wealth and status, enjoying the luxury that came with being by his side. But that life was now under siege. Eric leaked information about Marcus's scandal to Lila's social circle. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Friends distanced themselves, invitations dried up, and the glamorous lifestyle she had embraced began to feel isolating. The woman who had once dismissed Eric as predictable was now experiencing the consequences of her choices. Marcus, desperate to regain control, tried to spin the narrative in his favor. He held a press conference, denying the allegations and blaming them on jealous competitors. He even attempted to track down the source of the leaks, but Eric had covered his tracks meticulously. Every move Marcus made only served to deepen the public's suspicion. Eric watched it all unfold from the comfort of his living room. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of empowerment. The humiliation Marcus had inflicted on him that night in his home was being repaid tenfold. Eric's last move was the most satisfying. He arranged for a carefully timed exposé to be published, revealing not just Marcus's business crimes but also his personal indiscretions. Through his research, Eric had uncovered evidence of Marcus's infidelity with multiple women, even while he was with Lila. The exposé included interviews with former employees who described Marcus as a manipulative and abusive boss. It painted a picture of a man who thrived on exploiting others, leaving no doubt about his true nature. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Marcus's remaining clients abandoned him, and his company's stock plummeted. Lawsuits piled up, and regulators issued subpoenas. Within weeks, Hale Enterprises declared bankruptcy, and Marcus found himself facing criminal charges. As Marcus's world collapsed, so did Lila's. The lavish penthouse she had once flaunted on social media was seized by authorities, along with Marcus's cars and other assets. Her bank accounts, tied to Marcus's finances, were frozen, leaving her without a safety net. Eric heard through mutual acquaintances that Lila was now staying with a distant relative, far from the life of luxury she had grown accustomed to. The woman who had once dismissed him as predictable was now scrambling to rebuild her life from nothing. Eric wasn't done yet. He arranged for one final meeting with Lila, inviting her to his home under the guise of reconciliation. When she arrived, she looked like a shadow of her former self, tired, defeated, and desperate. "Eric," she began, her voice trembling, "I don't know where else to turn. I made a mistake. I was wrong about everything. Please, can we try again?" Eric stared at her, the woman he had once loved now a stranger to him. He didn't respond right away, letting the weight of her desperation hang in the air. Finally, he said, "Do you remember that night Marcus came into my home? The way he mocked me, humiliated me, and you stood there and said nothing?" Lila's eyes filled with tears, but Eric continued, "That night, I realized something. I realized you weren't worth fighting for. You chose him over me, and now you're here because you've lost everything. But it's too late, Lila. You made your choice." Marcus was arrested on charges of fraud and tax evasion, his name permanently tarnished. Lila faded into obscurity, her glamorous life reduced to a memory. And Eric, for the first time in months, he felt free. He didn't celebrate his victory publicly. There was no need. The satisfaction came from knowing he had taken back control of his life. Eric returned to his woodworking, finding peace in the rhythm of his craft. The betrayal had changed him, but it hadn't broken him. As he put the finishing touches on a new project, Eric thought about the man he had been and the man he had become. Revenge hadn't just been about punishing Marcus and Lila. It had been about reclaiming his own power, and he had succeeded. In the end, Eric had learned an invaluable lesson. Strength isn't about avoiding pain. It's about rising from it, stronger than before. Eric knew the time had come for the final act. His plan had unraveled Marcus's empire and stripped Lila of the life she had chosen over him. But there was one last piece to put into place. A confrontation that would solidify his victory and provide him with the closure he deserved. Eric sent an invitation to Lila, posing it as an opportunity to talk, to close the chapter between them. He kept his tone neutral, careful not to hint at his true intentions. He chose a quiet restaurant in town, one they had frequented during their happier days. It was a calculated move. A place that once symbolized their love, now transformed into the stage for their reckoning. When Lila arrived, Eric hardly recognized her. The confident, stylish woman he once knew had been replaced by someone who looked fragile and uncertain. Her clothes, though neat, were far less glamorous than the designer outfits she used to wear. Her face, once vibrant, was now pale and drawn. Life had not been kind to her since Marcus's downfall. "Eric," she said softly, her voice trembling, "thank you for agreeing to meet me. I've lost everything. I don't know where else to go." Eric studied her for a moment, his face unreadable. "Sit down," he said simply, gesturing to the chair across from him. As she sat, she fidgeted nervously, avoiding his gaze. "I was wrong," she began. About everything. Marcus. He wasn't who I thought he was. He lied to me, used me, and when things got bad, he abandoned me. I should have seen it sooner, but I didn't. And now, she broke off, her voice cracking. Eric leaned back in his chair, his expression cold. And now you're here, hoping I'll pick up the pieces. Lila flinched at the harshness of his tone but didn't argue. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said, but I had to try. I miss you, Eric. I miss us. Eric let her words hang in the air, their weight sinking in. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady and unyielding. Do you remember the night Marcus came into my home? The way he insulted me, mocked me, and treated me like I didn't matter? And you just stood there. Lila's eyes welled with tears, but Eric continued. You chose him over me. You chose his money, his charm, his promises. And now, when it's all gone, you expect me to forget? To take you back like nothing happened? I was foolish, Lila whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought I wanted excitement, but I didn't realize what I was losing until it was too late. Please, Eric, I need you. Eric's lips curled into a bitter smile. You don't need me. You need a way out of the mess you're in. And I'm not going to be your safety net. Lila's tears fell freely now, her desperation palpable. I know I hurt you, she said, but I loved you once, Eric. Doesn't that count for anything? Eric leaned forward, his gaze piercing. It did. But love isn't just about the good times. It's about loyalty, trust, and standing by each other when things get hard. You threw that away the moment you chose him. He pulled a folder from his bag and slid it across the table toward her. Do you know what this is? Lila hesitated before picking it up. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Documents detailing Marcus's downfall, the financial ruin Eric had orchestrated, and the steps he had taken to expose Marcus's crimes. You did this? She stammered, looking up at him in disbelief. Eric nodded, his expression unwavering. Yes, and I'd do it again. Marcus thought he could walk into my life and destroy it. You thought you could abandon me without consequences. I'm not the man you left behind, Lila. I'm stronger now, and I don't owe you anything. Lila sat there, speechless, the weight of Eric's words sinking in. She had underestimated him just as Marcus had. The man she had once dismissed as predictable had become someone she could barely recognize. Strong, resolute, and unyielding. Eric stood, signaling the end of the conversation. This is the last time we'll see each other, he said. I hope you find what you're looking for, Lila. But it won't be with me. As he walked away, he felt a strange sense of peace. The confrontation hadn't been about revenge alone. It had been about reclaiming his power and closing a chapter of his life that had caused him immense pain. Lila's tears, her regret, they didn't fill him with satisfaction. Instead, they confirmed what he already knew. He had moved on, and she was now a part of his past. As for Marcus, his life continued to spiral. The lawsuits and criminal charges left him bankrupt and disgraced. Once a man who thrived on power, he now lived in obscurity, haunted by his own greed and arrogance. Eric didn't need to confront him again. Marcus had already paid the price for his actions, and that was enough. Eric returned to his workshop that evening, the confrontation fresh in his mind. He picked up a piece of wood and began carving, losing himself in the familiar rhythm of his craft. Each cut, each stroke of the chisel, felt like a step toward rebuilding his life. He wasn't the same man he had been before Lila's betrayal, but he had found strength in his pain. He had faced the worst, fought back, and emerged stronger. Now he was ready to move forward, not with vengeance in his heart, but with a newfound sense of purpose. Eric had reclaimed his life, and nothing, no betrayal, no humiliation, could ever take that from him again. The days following Eric's final confrontation with Lila felt different, lighter. For the first time in months, the weight of betrayal no longer pressed down on him. The pain that had once consumed him was now replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had confronted his past, dismantled the lives of those who sought to ruin him, and, most importantly, reclaimed his own narrative. Sitting in his workshop, Eric allowed himself to reflect on the journey that had brought him to this point. When Lila first confessed her affair, he had felt lost, as if his entire world had crumbled. The betrayal had cut deep, not just because of Lila's infidelity, but because it made him question his own worth. For years, he had built his life around her happiness, only to discover that it hadn't been enough. But through the pain, Eric found strength he didn't know he possessed. He had faced the humiliation of Marcus's taunts, the heartbreak of Lila's indifference, and the overwhelming temptation to let the darkness consume him. Instead, he had chosen a different path. He had turned his pain into power, his anger into action. And in doing so, he had discovered a side of himself he had never seen before. Eric knew that Marcus and Lila were now living the consequences of their choices. Marcus, once a picture of arrogance and control, was now a broken man, stripped of his wealth, power, and reputation. The man who had mocked Eric in his own home was now a pariah, abandoned by the very people who once admired him. Lila's fate was no kinder. She had traded stability for excitement, only to find herself alone and destitute. Her dreams of a glamorous life had turned into a nightmare, and she had no one to blame but herself. Eric felt no satisfaction in her suffering, only a quiet sense of justice. She had made her choice, and she was living with the consequences. For Eric, the most important lesson was that he didn't need revenge to define his future. While dismantling Marcus's empire had been a necessary step in reclaiming his power, it wasn't what gave him closure. The real victory came from rediscovering his own strength and independence. Eric poured himself into his woodworking, taking on new projects and rebuilding his business. He found solace in the simple act of creation, the feel of wood beneath his hands, the satisfaction of turning raw materials into something beautiful. Each piece he crafted felt like a step toward healing, a reminder that he had the power to shape his own life. As Eric looked back on his journey, he realized he wasn't the only one who had experienced betrayal. Infidelity and heartbreak were universal struggles, and he hoped his story could serve as a reminder to others. You are stronger than you think. Pain is temporary, but the strength you gain from overcoming it can last a lifetime. He shared his story with close friends, and even considered writing it down one day, not as a tale of revenge, but as a story of resilience. He wanted others to know that no matter how broken they might feel, they had the power to rebuild. One evening, Eric sat on his porch, a cup of tea in hand, as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was cool and calm, carrying the faint scent of pine from the woods behind his house. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly at peace. He thought about the man he had been at the start of this journey, unsure, hurt, and lost, and the man he had become. He wasn't perfect, but he was stronger, wiser, and more in tune with his own needs and desires. He no longer lived for someone else's approval or love. He lived for himself. Eric's story wasn't just about revenge or heartbreak. It was about rediscovery. The betrayal that had once felt like the end of his world had become the catalyst for a new beginning. Marcus and Lila were part of his past, but they no longer held power over him. As he looked out at the fading light, Eric smiled to himself. He had taken control of his life, and there was nothing more powerful than that. And so life moved forward, stronger, wiser, free.